The rain washes away a whole lot of sins.
But out here in the deep timber, it kind of dissolves the boundary between our world and the things that feed on a guilty conscience. At night, in the rain, the world just disappears.
I've been a boundary tracker along the jagged edge of the Black Hills for 32 years. My whole life's been dedicated to reading the things people try to hide.
Whether it's frantic footprints in the mud or the way their eyes shift when they talk.
I've seen men freeze to death right next to their own campfires because panic blinded them. The relentless sound of the water masks every footstep, every breaking branch.
The rain doesn't hide you out here. It hides them.
It was mid-October. The kind of bitter, biting cold that just settles right into your bones. I was sitting alone in the isolated border ranger station, just nursing a burnt cup of black coffee and listening to the endless static on the emergency radio. The sky had cracked open around noon, dumping a freezing sheet of water over the canyons. I was praying nobody was foolish enough to be out in the gorge on a night like this.
But the woods have a funny way of ruining a quiet night.
That's when the heavy wooden door of the station slammed open. It hit the wall with a violent crack that made me jump. The storm just invited itself right inside. A guy stood in the doorway, soaked to the bone and gasping for air. He looked like he'd been chased by the devil himself. His eyes were wide with this frantic, unhinged kind of terror. He practically collapsed into the room, shivering violently. He introduced himself as David. He was shaking so hard, I thought his teeth were going to crack. I handed him a paper cup of warm water. He could barely hold on to it. He started telling me this story that sounded like a standard case of wilderness disorientation. He said he and his brother-in-law, Marcus, had been camping up near the ridge, claimed they got turned around in the storm, had a fight, and Marcus just wandered off into the brush. He cried. He begged me to call in a chopper. It was a hell of a performance. He cried. He begged me to call in a chopper. But as I listened to him, this cold knot started forming in my gut. Something about this guy was just dead wrong. I'm a tracker. I don't just listen to what people say. I look at what their bodies and their gear are telling me. I handed him a wool blanket, and as he wrapped it up, I looked down. I looked right at his boots. They were perfectly laced, double-knotted, and clean above the ankle. If you spend 2 hours thrashing through wet briars in the pitch black looking for a friend, your boots are going to be caked in heavy mud. Sure, his pants were wet from the rain, but they weren't stained with that dark, heavy clay from the upper ridge. He hadn't been running through the brush in a panic. He'd walked straight down the main gravel trail. Then I noticed his jacket. It was this high-end, bright orange waterproof shell. The kind that costs a small fortune and keeps you bone dry. But the sleeves were way too long, and the shoulders just hung off him. David was a small, nervous guy. That jacket belonged to someone with a much bigger build, someone like Marcus. I didn't say a word about it yet. You never confront a panicked man until you've got the high ground. I told him we needed to move right now. The temperature was dropping fast. If Marcus was out there without shelter in this downpour, hypothermia was going to stop his heart long before sunrise. I geared up, grabbed my heavy flashlight, med kit, blankets, and my rifle. I looked him dead in the eye. I told him he was coming back up that mountain with me to show me where he left him. He hesitated. I saw this flash of pure, absolute dread cross his face. Then he got defensive and angry. He started arguing that he was too exhausted, that his legs were cramping. He told me I should just go up there myself. I made it crystal clear. Real talk here. No starting point. Marcus was a dead man, and I wasn't leaving my only witness behind. Reluctantly, he zipped up that oversized jacket. and we stepped back out into the freezing deluge.
The hike back up to the boundary line was pure hell.
The rain was coming down in these thick, blinding sheets that just soaked right through you. Every step was a fight against slick, treacherous clay. Out there in the deep timber, the dark just swallows you whole.
My flashlight is supposed to cut through anything, but in that storm?
It was just a useless, glowing orb of gray mist.
David stayed a few paces behind me, keeping his head down and his mouth shut.
He wasn't acting like a guy desperate to save his family. He looked more like a prisoner walking straight to the gallows. Even in a blinding storm, you gotta trust your eyes and read the earth. I stopped on the trail and shined my light down into the mud.
I was looking for the tracks he left when he came down the mountain.
The light caught a set of boot prints pressed deep into the slick clay. They were David's tracks from earlier. And let me tell you, they told a terrifying story. The strides were steady, evenly paced, and completely deliberate. There were no slips, no frantic missteps, nothing.
This wasn't a man running in a blind panic to find help.
I knelt there in the freezing mud, just staring at those perfect, unhurried footprints. It hit me right in the chest. He had walked away from that campsite with calm, cold intention. That knot in my stomach tightened into a heavy stone. Warning: the wilderness out here on the border, it doesn't tolerate a liar. Malicious intent always demands a heavy toll in the deep timber. I stood up slowly and looked back at him standing there in the rain. He was shivering in that oversized jacket, looking around like a scared animal. But I saw right through the act.
We kept marching into the pitch-black forest, swallowed up by the fog. I gripped my rifle a little tighter.
I knew right then this wasn't a rescue mission anymore.
I was walking into the dark with a man who'd done something unforgivable.
We finally hit the campsite just past 2 in the morning. The old-growth pines didn't stop the freezing rain from turning the clearing into a muddy swamp. I swept my flashlight across the site, taking it all in. It looked like a masterpiece of deception to an untrained eye. A single large tent was pitched, its door flapping wildly. Over by the trees, a heavy tarp was deliberately unknotted, letting the rain pour right onto a soaked sleeping bag. David stood at the edge of the clearing, shivering violently in that oversized orange jacket.
He pointed a trembling finger toward some blackberry brambles.
He claimed that's where Marcus vanished, chasing after some strange noise in the dark.
I ignored his frantic pointing and walked straight over to the tent.
The wind was whipping that nylon door back and forth. I knelt down in the freezing mud and shined my flashlight inside to see the real story. The inside of the tent was perfectly dry, which made no sense given the swamp outside. There was one sleeping pad, completely undisturbed. Right beside it, tucked carefully away from the rain, sat a heavy, waterproof duffel bag. I reached inside and unzipped that heavy duffel bag. The zipper glided smoothly, totally untouched by the grit and mud of the storm.
I started pulling out the contents, laying them out in my flashlight beam.
Inside, I found Marcus's wallet, his car keys, heavy wool socks, and his compass.
Everything was packed with care.
Logical deduction. If Marcus ran out in a panic, he wouldn't have packed his compass. And he sure wouldn't have left his keys. I shifted my position and turned my light to the far corner of the tent. The beam revealed a pile of dirty clothes shoved against the wall. There was something bulky hidden underneath them. I reached under the pile of dirty clothes and pulled out the hidden object. It was a pair of large, heavy leather hiking boots. I held them up, examining them. The boots were perfectly laced, double-knotted, and completely bone dry. There wasn't a single drop of water on them.
Suddenly, there was a chilling realization. The lie was fully exposed.
A man doesn't just wander off into a freezing downpour in his bare feet.
I stood up and turned to face him. The rain was absolutely deafening against that nylon tent, but the silence between us, it was heavier than the storm.
I walked right up to him and held those dry boots up in the light.
I kept my voice dead calm.
I asked him how a grown man wanders off into a freezing downpour without his boots.
He took a step back, looking like he'd seen a ghost.
His eyes kept darting toward the tree line, looking for a way out.
He started stammering this wild story about Marcus losing his mind and stripping off his clothes.
I wasn't buying a single word of it.
I stepped closer, dropping my voice so it cut right through the rain.
I told him about his clean pants, his calm footprints, and that oversized jacket. I told him I knew he was lying to my face.
I gave him one last chance. I said if he didn't tell me exactly where Marcus was, I'd turn around and leave him out here in the dark.
That threat broke him.
The whole act just crumbled right there in the mud. He fell to his knees and started bawling. But it wasn't guilt. It was just pure, venomous anger that he got caught. Down in the mud, he finally spilled everything. He told me he'd completely bankrupted their family business.
He gambled away everything they had and forged Marcus's name on the loans.
Marcus found out the truth and was going to go straight to the cops. He was going to tell his wife and put David in a cell.
So David begged him for one last camping trip, claiming he just wanted to talk it out. But he never planned on fixing a thing.
He waited until Marcus was dead asleep under that tarp.
Then he quietly grabbed Marcus's boots and warm clothes, shoved them in the tent, and put on his jacket. Then he kicked the support rope, dropping that freezing wet canvas right on top of him. When Marcus woke up blind and freezing, David just walked away.
He left him out by the ravines, knowing the cold would stop his heart.
I just stared at him kneeling there in the mud.
The disgust I felt was so deep my hands were literally shaking.
He lured his own family out here to use the woods as a murder weapon.
But he made one hell of a miscalculation.
He thought the woods were just trees and rocks. Say, in a natural American voice, grim warning. He didn't know that when you commit that kind of betrayal, the land itself turns against you.
The air around us suddenly shifted. The temperature dropped so fast, my breath turned to thick white clouds, and this unnatural fog rolled in.
David suddenly stopped crying. He slowly stood up, wiping the freezing mud off his face.
His eyes went wide, staring right past my shoulder into the pitch black. His voice was shaking when he asked if I heard that. I gripped my rifle tight and swept my flashlight across the tree line.
At first, it was just the sound of the rain. But then, a noise drifted through the fog. Heavy, squelching footsteps in the mud, slowly circling our camp. These weren't the stumbling steps of a freezing man. They were slow, deliberate, and staying just out of the light.
I called out, telling whoever it was to step forward.
The footsteps stopped dead.
For 5 agonizing seconds, there was nothing but the rain. Then, a voice called out from the dark. It was Marcus's voice, but it was all wrong. It sounded perfectly clear, and it was coming from 15 feet up in the trees. The voice asked David why he took his boots.
David let out this pathetic whimper, like a dying animal.
He scrambled backward, slipping in the mud. His eyes were just locked on the canopy above in pure horror. Then the voice spoke again, but it shifted instantly. Now it was coming from right behind the tent at ground level.
It repeated their last argument, but with this hollow, mechanical echo.
Whatever was out there was mimicking the trauma to play with us. I raised my rifle, my heart hammering against my ribs.
I knew what kind of things mimicked human distress out here. I ordered David to get behind me and told him not to run. If you run, you trigger their hunting instinct.
But David was completely broken. He let out a scream, turned on his heel, and bolted straight into the black woods. He crashed through the brush in a blind panic. I lunged forward and shouted his name, but the fog just swallowed him whole.
The second he ran, those heavy, squelching footsteps started up again.
But this time, they were moving impossibly fast. I could hear heavy branches snapping and thick brush tearing apart as it chased him down. Then came the laughing. It sounded like Marcus, but hollow and distorted. It wasn't a human sound at all. It was this booming, metallic noise that literally rattled my teeth and vibrated right through my chest. I just stood there, alone, in the middle of the campsite. My flashlight was cutting nervously through the rain, and my rifle was actually trembling in my hands. I knew I couldn't go after him. Chasing David into that dark meant absolute death. The woods had already claimed him. The ancient rules of the wilderness were being enforced out there, and I was just a witness to it. But I wasn't out there for David anyway. I was there for Marcus. I forced myself to turn away from those terrible sounds echoing through the eastern woods. I grabbed my medical kit and headed west toward the ravines. That hike was an absolute nightmare of slick rock and freezing mud. My mind was playing tricks on me. Every shadow looked like some towering figure, and every gust of wind sounded like a hollow, mocking voice. I had to keep my mind focused entirely on the earth. I was tracking the faint, desperate signs of a dying man. I spotted broken twigs and then some smeared mud on the side of a boulder. Then I saw it. A single faint footprint left by a bare foot on a sharp piece of slate. The relentless rain was trying to wash it all away, but it felt like the forest was actually letting me find him. I finally found Marcus about an hour later. He had somehow managed to crawl under the deep overhang of a limestone cliff. It was just enough to shelter him from the absolute worst of the freezing rain. He was curled up in a tight fetal position, shivering so violently I could hear his teeth chipping. His lips were completely blue and his skin was pale as snow. He was in the final, lethal stages of hypothermia. I knew I had to move fast if he was going to survive. I quickly stripped off his soaking wet clothes. Then I wrapped him as tightly as I could in my thermal emergency blanket. I fired up a portable chemical heat pack right away. I pressed it directly to his bared chest to stop the shivering. He was so incredibly cold, he barely even reacted to the sudden heat. I poured warm, sugary tea from my thermos straight down his throat. I practically had to force him to swallow it. If I didn't get his core temperature up fast, he wasn't going to make it. I talked to him constantly while we waited. I had to keep his mind tethered to the living world. I told him about his wife, Sarah, and that he couldn't let the dark win. It took 3 agonizing hours under that rock. Finally, his core temperature rose just enough for him to open his eyes. He looked up at me, and his eyes were bruised and completely hollow. He stared at me through the dim, gray light of the overhang. His voice was barely a raspy whisper when he finally spoke. He looked right at me and said, "David left me in the dark." I held his shoulder tightly so he knew he was safe. I told him I already knew everything that happened. I promised him that the truth was safe and that the nightmare was finally over. I managed to get his dry boots onto his freezing feet. They were the exact same ones I had brought down from the tent.
He was incredibly weak and exhausted, but he was alive. I practically carried him all the way down the mountain. The first gray light of dawn began to break through the heavy storm clouds.
It finally illuminated our path out of that freezing hell. The rain finally stopped just as we reached the ranger station.
The sky was a bruised purple, and the woods were completely silent. That oppressive presence had finally retreated back into the deep valleys. We got Marcus off that mountain and rushed him straight to the nearest hospital. The doctors didn't waste a single second. They started treating him for severe exposure right away.
He ended up spending 2 grueling weeks in the intensive care unit.
His body had been pushed to the absolute limit out there in the freezing rain. It took a long time to recover from the severe frostbite and hypothermia. But Marcus was tough, and against all odds, he actually survived the whole ordeal. When they finally discharged him, he went straight home to his wife, Sarah. He was just incredibly grateful to be alive. He wasn't going to let David's betrayal destroy his family.
Marcus laid it all out and exposed the massive financial ruin David had secretly caused.
He brought all those forged documents and stolen funds right into the light. By telling the truth, Marcus protected his family's future and secured his own justice.
He didn't need to go looking for some kind of violent revenge.
He won the fight simply through his own survival and honesty. As for David, a massive search and rescue operation was launched the very next morning. The storm had finally passed, leaving the woods dead quiet. We had teams mobilizing at first light to go find him. We combed the entire eastern ridge of the boundary line. We brought in tracking dogs, deployed infrared drones, and had teams of seasoned rangers sweeping the area. We checked every single inch of that dense timber.
It didn't take long to find the first piece of evidence out there.
Deep in the woods, we found that bright orange waterproof jacket David had been wearing. But the thing was completely torn to shreds. The shredded remains of that jacket weren't just lying on the ground. They were hung high up in the thick branches of a massive dead oak tree. It had to be at least 40 feet off the forest floor. A little further east, we found David's clean, expensive hiking boots. They were sitting perfectly side by side, placed neatly right at the edge of a deep black ravine. But we never found David. The dogs refused to track his scent past the campsite. They just sit in the mud, whine, and press against their handlers. They just stared into the dense brush with wide, frightened eyes. The official report states that David became disoriented in the storm. They say he suffered a fatal fall into the gorge and was likely swept away by the flooded river. It's a neat, clean explanation that satisfies the grieving family and the local authorities. But I know the truth. I know what I saw in that campsite, and I know what I heard echoing from the Canopy. The deep woods don't care about human laws. They don't care about money or pride or family drama, but they recognize malice. They recognize the scent of a man who'd throw his own blood to the wolves to save his own skin. David thought he could use the isolation of the wilderness to hide his ultimate betrayal. He thought the heavy rain would wash away his sins and cover his tracks forever. He forgot that the forest is alive. He forgot that in the deep, unseen wilderness, the dark doesn't just hide you, it watches you. And when you break the sacred trust of human connection, when you leave a man out to die in the cold out of pure, selfish cowardice, something out there in the rain will make sure you never find your way home. This land is beautiful, but it's entirely unforgiving. If you ever find yourself camping on the jagged edge of the boundary lines, you gotta be careful. When the sky cracks open in the dead of night, stay in your tent. Hold your loved ones close. Don't let petty anger or dark secrets follow you into the timber. Because out here,
At night, in the rain, the world disappears.
And sometimes, something else takes its place.
Days after the storm broke, the hills got quiet again. I was back out on the boundary line, walking those same trails.
The mud was freezing up, locking in the scars from that night. Even with the search called off, the woods weren't done.
Patrolling the eastern ridge, I spotted something caught in a dead bush. A tiny shredded piece of bright orange fabric, flapping in the wind.
I didn't even try to touch it.
You learn quick that some things just belong to the timber now.
I just stared, thinking about a guy who thought he could outsmart this place.
Whew, when my shift wrapped, I locked the station door tight.
The quiet inside was heavy after the howling winds from that night.
I poured coffee, staring at the radio, half expecting to hear that voice.
I spent an hour cleaning my rifle, letting the routine calm me. It's a ritual that keeps you grounded when the weird stuff gets close. A gun won't stop what's out there, but it reminds me I'm breathing.
Folks in town spun their own stories about what happened to David.
They talked about flash floods and rogue bears.
I let them talk. Those lies keep them from being scared to death.
But the tribal elders around here didn't ask a single question.
An old friend just took one look at my eyes and nodded.
He knew the boundary got tested, and the land balanced its own scales.
Now, every time I smell rain coming, my heart skips a beat.
I catch myself double-checking locks and making sure my flashlight is charged.
Those heavy footsteps circling the camp are burned into my brain forever.
I still hike out to those limestone cliffs where I found Marcus.
It's a pilgrimage, a reminder of how thin the line really is.
That empty overhang is a monument to the man the woods spared.
I'll keep walking this boundary until my legs give out. It's my job to stand between our world and that ancient dark. Because if you bring dark secrets into the woods, something's waiting in the rain.
This land is beautiful, but it's entirely unforgiving. People come from all over for the views.
But they forget how harsh it really is.
If you ever find yourself camping on the jagged edge of the boundary lines, you gotta respect the isolation.
The deep timber isn't a playground. City rules don't apply out here. You're just a guest in a very old place.
And when the sky cracks open in the dead of night, that illusion of safety just shatters.
The temperature drops, the wind howls, and the ground turns into a trap. That's when the wilderness truly wakes up. If that happens, stay in your tent. Don't go wandering out into the dark to check on a strange noise.
Those thin nylon walls are the only thing keeping you tethered to the world you know.
Hold your loved ones close and just wait for dawn. The storm's gonna try to play tricks on your mind.
It wants to isolate you in your own fear.
But if you stay together, you've got a chance.
Most importantly, do not let petty anger or dark secrets follow you into the timber.
The forest acts like a mirror.
It reflects whatever malice you bring into it.
Say in a natural American voice, chilling warning. If you carry betrayal in your heart, the land's gonna sense it. Because out here, at night, in the rain, the world just disappears.
The trees dissolve into a wall of pitch black.
You're left completely blind, stripped of every defense you thought you had. I've spent my whole life watching this boundary, and I know exactly what the darkness hides. The rain doesn't just wash away your tracks. It clears the stage for the ancient things that patrol these woods. And sometimes, when the guilt is heavy enough, something else takes its place. The void gets filled by a presence that feeds on our worst mistakes. It's a consequence you just can't outrun. So, respect the boundary. Warning,
Never take the deep timber for granted. The sun will rise again, but the forest never forgets what happens in the dark.
Say, in a natural American voice, closing thought, stay safe, stay honest, and never walk into the woods with a heavy conscience.
The storm eventually passed, but the chill it left behind never truly faded. I still sit at that same wooden desk, listening to the static on the radio. Every time the sky darkens, my mind drifts right back to that night. I still patrol the eastern ridge, walking the same trails where David tried to hide his sins. Sometimes I catch a glimpse of torn orange fabric snagged high in the branches.
It's a grim monument to a man who thought he could outsmart the wilderness.
The deep timber remains silent, keeping its secrets buried beneath the mud. These ancient trees stand like silent judges. They've witnessed countless acts of human frailty over the centuries. They don't judge us by our laws, but by the raw truth of our actions. I often find myself standing at the edge of the ravine where we found David's boots.
I look down into that black abyss.
I wonder what he saw in his final moments when the forest finally caught up to him. The darkness down there just seems to swallow the light completely. The muddy river at the bottom of the gorge continues to flow. It washes away the physical traces of that night, scrubbing the earth clean. But water can only wash away so much. The memory of malice stains this land permanently. On quiet nights, I build a small fire near the boundary line. I stare into the flames. I swear I can still hear that metallic voice echoing from the canopy.
It's a sound that's gonna haunt me forever.
The old campsite where Marcus was left has been reclaimed by nature.
Blackberry brambles have grown thick over the spot where the tent stood.
They cover the scars of betrayal with sharp thorns.
The wilderness heals itself, burying our mistakes under new growth.
32 years of tracking have etched deep lines into my face.
Each one is a story of survival, loss, or something unexplained.
I carry the weight of these woods on my shoulders. It's a lonely life, but it's the only one I know.
The wooden boundary markers along the ridge are beaten by harsh storms.
They stand as a final warning to anyone wandering off the path.
Past these signs, the rules of civilization end,
and the ancient, unforgiving laws of the forest begin. So I'll keep walking the line, my flashlight cutting through the fog.
As long as people try to hide their darkness, I'll be out here.
I'll be reading their tracks.
The boundary's gotta be watched, because the things in the rain are always waiting. This land is beautiful, no doubt about it. People come from all over just to see these sweeping valleys and ancient pines.
But when that sun drops behind the ridge, the beauty fades fast.
It's an entirely unforgiving place if you don't respect it.
These sharp rocks and sudden drops don't care about your weekend plans. Out here, the wilderness always has the final say. If you ever find yourself camping on the jagged edge of the boundary lines, you gotta know the risks. Pitching a tent in the deep timber means you're stepping into a world with ancient rules. You're just a guest, and this place doesn't tolerate mistakes. When the sky cracks open in the dead of night, the isolation is absolute. The freezing rain drowns out the rest of the world. You're trapped in a little nylon bubble, and that's when the real test begins. Whatever you hear out there in the dark, just stay in your tent. Don't go wandering out into the freezing rain to chase a strange noise.
That thin shelter is the only thing keeping you tethered to the living world.
Hold your loved ones close. The wilderness preys on division and isolation. If you stick together, you've got a fighting chance to see the morning light. Do not let petty anger or dark secrets follow you into the timber. The forest has a way of reflecting the ugliest parts of human nature right back at us. Malice is a scent that carries far on the freezing wind. Because out here, at night, in the rain, the world disappears. Familiar landmarks are swallowed up by the shadows. You're entirely cut off, left alone with your own conscience. I'll keep walking this line, shining my light where most folks are too scared to look. I'll read the tracks and find the lost. But even after all these years, there are still moments when I just stop and hold my breath. When the rain falls heavy and the fog rolls in, that boundary gets dangerously thin. The woods are never truly empty.
Because when the world disappears in the storm, sometimes something else takes its place.
When the sun finally comes up, it's kind of hard to believe what just happened in the dark. The light cuts right through that fog, painting the pines in a soft glow. It's a quiet reminder that the wilderness always survives the night, no matter what. Back at the station, you just pack your gear and try to process it all. The radio finally goes quiet, giving you a second to just breathe. But you know it's only a matter of time before it crackles back to life. You look out at that tree line, and you feel every single year you've spent walking this boundary. The daylight feels like a truce, but you know it's only temporary.
The woods are just resting.
Out on the trails, the rain has already washed away every footprint.
Nature just wipes the slate clean, like we were never even there. It keeps its own secrets buried deep in the mud.
That limestone overhang where we found Marcus looks like just another rock in the daylight.
But to him, it was the only thing standing between life and death.
It's crazy what a human being can endure when they refuse to give up.
So, you lace your boots back up and head right back out on the line. The storm might be over, but the job never really ends.
There's always another mile to walk.
When you see it from above, you realize just how small we really are out here.
Millions of ancient pines stretching out like a massive dark green ocean.
It's beautiful, sure, but it demands your absolute respect. You don't survive out here by trying to conquer the land.
You survive by understanding your place in it and respecting the old rules.
Because the woods were here long before us, and they'll be here long after.
But the day always ends, and the sun starts dipping back behind those ridges.
You feel that familiar chill creeping right back into the air.
The shadows start getting longer, and the whole forest gets quiet again. So when the light finally fades, you just click your flashlight back on.
You stand your ground on the boundary line, and you keep watching. Because out here in the dark, someone's got to keep an eye on what's waiting in the trees.